The date ended with the kind of kindness that feels worse than cruelty because you are expected to thank the person for being gentle while they are still handing you back your hope. Her name was Marissa, and she had chosen a wine bar with small candles, narrow tables, and menus that used words like earthy to describe something that cost $14 a glass. I had worn the good charcoal sweater, the one my sister claimed made me look like I had my life together, which was generous considering I had spent 20 minutes before leaving trying to remember whether I still owned confidence. Marissa made it through one drink, half a story about her marketing job, and exactly 3 polite laughs before she looked down at her phone like it had offered her witness protection. Then she smiled in that careful way people do when they are about to be decent and devastating, and said I was really kind, really easy to talk to, but she did not want to waste my time because she was not feeling the spark. I said I appreciated her honesty because apparently some part of me was still committed to making rejection comfortable for the person rejecting me. She touched my arm once, warmly enough to prove she was not heartless, then left me sitting there with 2 untouched appetizer plates and the strange aftertaste of being described as a man someone respected more than wanted. By the time I walked home, Chicago had turned cold in that damp, personal way it does in April when the wind comes off the lake and behaves like it knows your private failures. I managed the Orpheum, a small independent cinema 3 blocks from my building, which meant I spent most of my life selling other people better endings than the ones I knew how to arrange for myself. I was 34. Old enough to stop acting surprised when dating felt like an audition for a role nobody had written clearly. My last serious relationship had ended with a sentence I still hated for its politeness. Simon, you're kind and dependable, and that's why this is so hard. I had learned then that being dependable could sound a lot like being furniture. Useful, familiar, hard to dislike, easy to leave behind when someone wanted a story with more heat in it. So I walked home with my hands in my coat pockets, rehearsing jokes I could tell my sister if she asked, pretending I was not already turning Marissa's words into another small stone in the same old pocket. Our building was a 1920s brick 6 flat with a front door that complained, radiators that hissed like gossip, and a stoop where everyone pretended they were only stopping for a minute. Eva Carr lived across the hall from me on the 2nd floor in apartment 2B, where there was always some lamp glowing through the transom and some half-finished project leaning against the wall. She worked as a freelance interior stylist and set dresser, which meant she could make a blank wall look intentional and a thrift store chair look expensive, but somehow still lost her keys twice a week. We had been neighbors for 14 months, long enough for patterns to form without either of us naming them. I fixed her sticking window in January. She brought me soup when I caught the flu in February and called it aggressive broth. We borrowed olive oil, traded movie recommendations, shoveled snow badly, and sat on the stoop sometimes after long days when going upstairs too quickly felt too much like admitting there was nobody waiting. Eva was not safe in the way I had tried to make her safe. She was sharp-eyed, warm when she chose to be, and impossible to fool for more than about 12 seconds. That night, she was sitting on the stoop when I got back, wrapped in a cream cardigan over black leggings, one knee drawn up, a paper cup of coffee resting beside her like it had given up hours ago. The streetlight caught the copper in her dark hair, and for one ridiculous second, I wished I had come home from somewhere better, as if she could see rejection clinging to my coat. She looked up before I reached the steps, and her face changed just slightly. Not dramatically. Eva never wasted expression. But her eyes moved over me, the sweater, the 2 empty hands, the forced little smile I had dragged onto my face like furniture across a floor. That bad? She asked. I stopped at the bottom step and tried to sound casual. Depends. If the goal was 1 drink and a clean emotional exit, then honestly, very efficient. Eva did not smile the way I wanted her to. She picked up the coffee, remembered it was cold, made a face, and set it down again. She left early. I climbed 1 step. You say that like you were keeping score. She looked away toward the street, but not fast enough. Maybe I was curious. I should have made another joke and gone inside. That was the sensible route, the grown man route, the route that preserved hallway peace and kept Eva in the category where I could think about her too long and still call it harmless. Instead, I sat 2 steps below her, close enough that the side of my coat brushed the toe of her boot. The city kept moving around us. Tires hissing on wet pavement, somebody laughing too loudly at the corner, the elevated train groaning somewhere beyond the rooftops. I told her Marissa had been nice about it, which was true, and somehow made it worse. I said she had used the word spark, and Eva's mouth tightened like that word had personally offended her. I hate that word, she said. People use it when they want chemistry to do all the moral labor. I laughed once because that was exactly the kind of sentence Eva could say while looking like she was merely discussing weather. It's fine. I told her. I survived. I even paid for the roasted cauliflower nobody ate, so technically I supported local agriculture. She looked at me then, and the humor fell out of the air. Simon, she said, softer than usual. I hated how much I liked my name and her voice. I hated that it made me feel caught instead of comforted. I leaned back on my hands and stared at the street because looking at her was starting to feel like telling the truth. The annoying thing is, I wasn't even heartbroken, I admitted. I barely knew her. I think I was just embarrassed that I tried. Like I dressed up and left the apartment believing maybe tonight would be different, and then I got gently returned to sender before the second drink. Eva was quiet long enough that I wondered if I had said too much. Then she shifted down one step, bringing herself closer, not touching me but changing the distance in a way my body noticed before my brain could file an objection. She had no idea what she was walking away from, she said. I made a sound that was supposed to be a laugh. That's neighbor loyalty talking. No, Eva said. That's me being tired of watching women treat you like a comfortable chair in a room they're only passing through. I turned toward her then, because there are sentences you cannot pretend not to hear. Her cheeks had gone a little pink, but her eyes held mine with a steadiness that made the whole stoop feel smaller. I said her name carefully, like it might break something. Eva. She swallowed, glanced toward our front door, then back at me. What? I asked, and I meant several things at once. For a second, she looked like she might retreat into sarcasm, into the old rhythm where we both survived dangerous moments by pretending they were jokes. But Eva did not move away. She set her hands between us on the cold concrete step, close enough that if I shifted my fingers an inch, I would touch hers. Try me instead, she said. The words were quiet, but they did not land softly. They landed like a glass set down too hard in a silent room. I stared at her, my brain refusing to assemble them into anything casual. She gave a tiny, humorless laugh and looked down, but she still did not take it back. The wind moved through the railing. Somewhere upstairs, a window shut. I heard myself ask, "Do you mean that?" Eva looked back at me, nervous now, exposed in a way I had never seen from her, and for once, she did not smile to save either of us. Eva did not answer right away, which somehow made the sentence feel more real. If she had laughed, waved a hand, told me not to look at her like that because obviously she was joking, I would have accepted the escape route and walked upstairs with my heart still mostly intact. But she just sat there on the stoop with the cold coffee beside her and her fingers resting too close to mine, looking at me like she had finally kicked open a door she had spent months pretending was only a wall. "I mean it," she said, and her voice was steady enough to scare me more than nerves would have. I tried to smile because my instincts had been trained by years of emotional self-defense. "You realize I just got rejected by a woman who spent 42 minutes deciding I had the romantic energy of a well-organized pantry." Eva's mouth twitched, but she did not let me hide inside the joke. "I'm not applying for the position of emergency replacement woman." "Good," I said too quickly, then cleared my throat. Because that would be a terrible job. No benefits, mostly emotional debris. She looked at me for a long second and said, "Simon, I have seen you carry groceries upstairs for Mrs. Donnelly with a fever. I have seen you fix my window at midnight with duct tape and wounded pride, and I have seen you pretend not to be lonely on this exact stoop more times than you think. I'm not confused about what I'm offering. That should have made things easier. It did not. Hope, when you have been careful for a long time, does not feel like sunlight at first. It feels like a trap with better lighting." I looked at Eva's hand again, then at the front door, then at the windows above us where our separate apartments sat across the same narrow hallway like two witnesses waiting to testify. "We're neighbors," I said, as if she might have missed the architectural facts. Eva nodded very seriously. I had noticed. "The matching mailboxes tipped me off. If this gets weird, it gets weird every time we take out trash. Simon, it got weird the second I said try me instead, and you looked at me like I had just handed you a lit firework. That got a laugh out of me, small and helpless." She smiled then, but it softened almost immediately. I don't need you to do anything tonight, she said. I'm not asking you to kiss me on the stairs because some woman had bad taste and you had a rough hour. I just couldn't sit here and watch you come home looking like somebody had confirmed every bad thing you secretly believe about yourself. The accuracy of that hit harder than I wanted it to. I looked away because Eva had a talent for finding the bruise without pressing on it too cruelly. She stood suddenly, brushing invisible dust from her cardigan like she had reached a decision. Come on. I blinked up at her. Where? Diner. Eva. Don't Eva me. You had one drink and rejected cauliflower. That is not dinner. That is a sad museum exhibit. I told her it was late, and she said that was the entire point of diners, then offered me her hand like we had not just altered the chemical composition of the air between us. I stared at it long enough for her to raise an eyebrow. I'm being brave here, Hale. Don't make me stand around doing jazz hands. So I took her hand. Her fingers were cool from the night, but her grip was sure, and the simple fact of walking beside her down our block after midnight felt more intimate than anything Marissa and I had done under candles. Eva kept her hand in mine for exactly half a block, then let go to push her hair behind her ear, and I hated how much I noticed the absence. The diner was called Lou's, though I had never seen anyone named Lou inside it, just a rotating staff of women who looked like they knew your problems before you ordered. We slid into a booth by the window, and Eva immediately stole the side facing the door because, according to her, she liked to monitor incoming foolishness. The waitress brought coffee without asking and fries because Eva ordered them with the confidence of someone saving a man from himself. For a few minutes, we pretended we were simply two neighbors doing a strange but harmless thing. She asked what Marissa had talked about, and I said mostly brand strategy and her dog's digestive issues, which made Eva close her eyes and whisper that I had survived a hostage situation. I asked why she was outside so late, and she stirred her coffee until the spoon clicked against the cup. I told you. Air. Eva. She sighed. Fine. I knew you had the date. I sat back. You remembered? You said it Tuesday when you were sorting your mail and pretending the dentist bill didn't exist. You said, I have a date Friday, so if I die of optimism, water my plants. You don't remember normal things like where you put your keys, but you remember that? She looked at me over the rim of her cup. Some things are easier to keep track of. The line should have been enough to make me happy, but fear has a way of asking for identification at the door. I wrapped both hands around my coffee and said, carefully, that I needed to know whether tonight was pity wearing lipstick. Eva made a face. First, I'm wearing tinted balm, and second, no. I smiled despite myself. She leaned forward, elbows near the fries, her voice lower now. I waited because I hated thinking of you coming home alone after trying. Not because I felt sorry for you, because I knew you'd make it into a joke before anyone could tell you it hurt. I did not have an answer for that. The diner hummed around us, old lights buzzing, plates clattering, someone arguing gently with a jukebox that had not worked since probably 1998. Eva picked up a fry, pointed it at me, and said, also, for the record, I have wanted to say something stupid for months. Tonight just made me reckless enough to say the cleaner version. My pulse changed. Cleaner version? She bit the fry, then seemed to realize what she had admitted. Do not look smug. I'm not smug. I'm deeply alarmed and mildly curious. That's your resting personality. I reached for the ketchup at the same time she did, and our hands knocked together. It was nothing. It was skin against skin for one clumsy second in a diner with bad coffee and two bright lights. But her eyes dropped to my mouth like the movement had pulled a thread between us. I should have moved back quickly. Instead, I held still, and she did too. Both of us suddenly quiet over a paper basket of fries, like adults who had forgotten how hands worked. Then Eva laughed under her breath, not because it was funny, but because tension needs somewhere to go. She dabbed a spot of ketchup from the corner of my mouth with her napkin before either of us had time to make that a reasonable decision. The gesture was casual for half a second, then not casual at all. Her fingers froze near my face. I could smell her vanilla shampoo, faint under the diner grease and coffee. She pulled her hand back first and looked out the window. Sorry, she said. I said, don't be, and meant it too clearly. We walked home slower than necessary. The air had cooled further, and Eva folded her arms against it, refusing my coat twice before accepting it on the third offer and muttering that I was annoyingly persistent. Seeing her in my coat did something unhelpful to my common sense, so I focused on the cracks in the sidewalk. Outside our building, the stoop waited under the streetlight like we had left a conversation sitting there. Eva stopped at the bottom step, my coat pulled around her shoulders, her face half shadowed and more serious than I had seen it all night. "There's something I haven't told you," she said. I felt the sentence arrive before I understood it. "About tonight? About why I almost didn't say anything tonight." She looked toward the door, then back at me, and whatever was in her expression made the warmth from the diner start to thin. "It matters," she said, "and if I don't tell you soon, this turns into me being unfair." I slept badly, which seemed unfair because nothing had technically happened except a woman I liked too much had said a sentence I had no idea where to put. The problem was that technically had never saved anyone. By morning, Eva's words had rearranged the hallway, the stairs, the mailboxes, the thin wall between our apartments, and possibly my central nervous system. I left for work earlier than necessary because I did not trust myself to run into her by the recycling bins and behave like a normal adult who knew how doors worked. The Orpheum was still dark when I got there, the lobby smelling faintly of old popcorn, floor cleaner, and rain-soaked coats from the night before. I unlocked the doors, counted the register, checked the projector schedule, and spent 20 minutes staring at a poster for a French drama while remembering the way Eva had said, "Try me instead," like she was not rescuing me from humiliation, but stepping into the open with both eyes on me. By late afternoon, I had convinced myself that the mature thing would be to give her space. By 6, I had revised that into the mature thing would be to talk eventually. By 7:30, I was standing in front of my apartment door holding takeout I did not remember ordering, listening to Eva move around across the hall. There was the soft scrape of something heavy being dragged, then a muttered curse, then the sound of a hammer hitting something that was definitely not a nail. I opened my door at the exact moment hers opened. She stood there in paint-splattered jeans and an oversized white shirt tied at the waist, her hair pushed up with a pencil, one cheek marked with a thin line of blue paint. We stared at each other for 1 second too long. Then she said, "Before you ask, the shelf started it." I looked past her at the leaning structure inside her apartment and said, "I believe the shelf has a strong case." She gave me the smallest smile, but there was worry tucked behind it. "Are we doing the thing where we pretend last night was just diner fries and poor judgment?" I held the takeout bag tighter than necessary. I was hoping not to. I'm just bad at deciding which version of brave is least likely to ruin the building. That made her laugh, and the sound loosened something in me. She leaned one shoulder against her doorframe, still not stepping back, not giving me the easy exit. I told her I had been thinking about what she said, and she said she had been thinking about what she had not said, which was not comforting. Before I could ask whether that was the important thing she had mentioned outside, she looked down at my takeout and said, "Is that dinner or a shield?" I admitted it could be both. She nodded toward the stairs. "There's a street fair 2 blocks over. Food trucks, bad music, local artists charging too much for earrings. Come with me." I told her I had just brought food home, and she said, "Great, put it in the fridge and disappoint it later." There are moments when a man can pretend to be cautious, and moments when the woman across the hall has blue paint on her cheek and is asking him to choose the living version of the night. I put the bag in my fridge and followed her downstairs. The street fair had that chaotic neighborhood energy where nobody seemed to know whether they were shopping, drinking, flirting, or blocking the sidewalk professionally. Eva moved through it like she belonged everywhere without needing anyone's permission, stopping to touch handmade mugs, argue gently with a candle seller about the difference between cedar and sandalwood, and point out design choices in vendor tents as if she were narrating a documentary only I could hear. I should have felt out of place, but with Eva, ordinary things kept becoming privately entertaining. She bought us paper cups of lemonade that tasted mostly like optimism and sugar, then made me split a plate of tacos because, according to her, a man cannot live on defensive takeout and emotional repression. I told her that had been my brand for years. She said she knew, and that was why she was staging a hostile intervention. We did not hold hands, not at first. But our shoulders bumped often enough that pretending it was accidental became insulting to both of us. After the fair, we walked toward the lake because Eva claimed she needed air that did not smell like fried dough and parking meters. The sky was bruised purple over the water, and the wind lifted her hair across her face. I reached to move it before thinking, then stopped myself halfway there like an idiot signaling traffic. Eva noticed. Of course she did. She caught my wrist lightly. Not dramatic, not possessive, just enough to make me look at her. You can, she said. My throat went dry in a way that was frankly embarrassing for a man who managed staff schedules and emergency plumbing leaks. I brushed the hair from her cheek with the back of my fingers, careful and slow, and the blue paint mark was still there, faint near her jaw. She smiled, but her eyes did not let the moment become only cute. See? She said. Not fatal, I said. The night is young because humor remained my least expensive survival tool. She kept my wrist for half a second longer before letting go. I do not know why I suggested the Orpheum after that. Maybe because it was the one place in my life where I knew how the lights worked. Maybe because showing Eva the empty theater felt safer than trying to explain what was happening inside me. We went through the side entrance, and I turned on only the aisle lights, leaving the room soft and shadowed. Eva stood at the back of the theater, looking up at the faded ceiling details, the velvet curtains, the rows of seats waiting for other people's stories. This place is very you, she said. I asked if that was an insult. She shook her head. No. It's warm, a little stubborn, better than it looks from outside, and pretending it doesn't care if people come back. I looked at her then, really looked, and felt the strange ache of being understood by someone who could have simply flirted and made it easier. We sat in the back row while an old projector trailer played silently on the screen. She asked me what ending I would give the bad date if I could rewrite it, and I told her honestly that I would cut it shorter and get to the stoop faster. Eva went quiet beside me. Her phone buzzed before she could answer. She glanced at the screen, and something crossed her face quickly enough that most people would have missed it. I did not. She turned the phone over, but not before I saw the name at the top of the message. Brooklyn Contract. The theater suddenly felt too quiet. I tried not to make it a thing because we were new at whatever this was, and I had no right to sound like a man already afraid of losing something he had barely been brave enough to touch. But Eva knew me too well for such early claims. She looked down at the dark phone between us, then back at the empty screen. That's part of what I need to tell you, she said. I forced a nod that probably fooled neither of us. What does Brooklyn mean? I asked, and the look on her face made it clear the answer was not going to stay small. We did not talk about Brooklyn inside the theater. Maybe that sounds cowardly, and maybe it was, but there are some conversations that need ordinary air around them. Not velvet seats and a silent screen making everything feel more dramatic than it already is. Eva seemed to understand that without me explaining it. She stood first, slipped her phone into the back pocket of her jeans, and said we should walk back before I started pretending I had not seen the message. That was Eva's talent. She could call me out and somehow make it feel less like an accusation than a hand on the back of my chair, keeping me from tipping over. We locked up the Orpheum in quiet steps, and the whole walk home had that careful feeling people get when the truth is walking with them but has not decided who has to speak first. I kept my hands in my jacket pockets. Eva walked close enough that her sleeve brushed mine twice, and each time neither of us moved away. When we reached the building, we did not go inside. We stopped at the stoop like it had been expecting us, like old brick and cold concrete had more courage than either of us. Eva sat first, not in the same spot as the night before, but close enough to make memory useful. I sat beside her, leaving a few inches between us because distance suddenly felt polite and unbearable at the same time. For a while, she looked down the block at the empty stretch of sidewalk and said nothing. Then she told me the Brooklyn contract was for 6 weeks, maybe more if the company liked her work. A boutique hotel group needed set styling and interior staging for a launch campaign, and it was the kind of job freelancers said yes to because saying no felt like telling ambition to come back when life was less complicated. She had known about the possibility for almost 3 weeks. She had not signed anything yet. She had also not told me because, in her words, it felt ridiculous to tell my neighbor I might leave when I was still pretending I did not care whether he came home from dates. I tried to receive that gracefully. I am sure I failed. Something in my face must have closed because Eva immediately turned toward me. There it is, she said quietly. I asked what she meant, though I knew. She gave me a sad little look and said I had just gone from standing next to her to standing behind glass. I hated how accurate that was. I told her I was not upset, which was the kind of obvious lie people tell when they are trying to protect the wrong person from the wrong thing. Eva did not argue. She only waited, and the waiting did what her questions usually did. It made the joke in my mouth feel cheap. So I told her the truth, or at least the ugliest corner of it. "I'm scared this only happened because last night was bad," I said. "I'm scared you saw me come home bruised and said something brave because you're kind. And now Brooklyn is reminding me that I might just be the emotional layover before your real life takes off." Eva's face changed. Not with anger exactly, but with hurt sharp enough to make me regret the sentence even before it finished breathing. She looked away, pulled her cardigan tighter, and said she understood why I would think that, but it still stung. I apologized, and she shook her head. "Don't apologize for saying the frightened thing. Just don't dress it up as logic." That landed. I rubbed both hands over my face and told her I was tired of being the man women described with safe words. Nice, steady, dependable, easy. I told her those words had started to feel less like compliments and more like a room where desire never arrived. Marissa had not broken my heart, but she had repeated an old sentence in a new dress, and I had come home feeling like the universe was very gently confirming I was useful but not wanted. Eva listened without interrupting. When I finally stopped, she exhaled slowly and said, "That is why I waited." I looked at her. She was staring straight ahead now, cheeks flushed from cold or confession. "I didn't wait because I felt sorry for you. I waited because I was angry. Not at you, exactly. At the way you keep handing the best parts of yourself to people who only know how to say thank you and walk away." For once, I had no defense ready. The street was quiet except for a bus sighing at the corner and the faint hum of somebody's television through an open window. Eva continued, softer now, saying she had watched me for months, not in some dramatic movie way, but in the small ways neighbors notice each other when they are pretending not to. She noticed that I always checked the lobby door twice when her shoots ran late. She noticed I saved the mail circulars for her because she used them under paint trays. She noticed I remembered her coffee order even though she changed her mind about everything else. "And I kept telling myself it was just because you're decent," she said. Then one day I realized I was using your decency as an excuse to not admit I wanted more than your help. The words hit me differently from flirtation. They were not polished. They were not trying to impress me. They felt like something she had carried until carrying it alone became heavier than the risk of handing it over. I asked her why Brooklyn made her hold back, and she laughed once without humor. She said her last relationship had been built out of almosts, almost chosen, almost enough, almost a home. He had liked having her there, liked her taste, liked the rooms she made warmer, but every time she asked for clarity, he acted like she was ruining something comfortable. So I promised myself I would never again confuse being useful in someone's life with being wanted in it, she said. Then you came along, fixing windows and making terrible jokes and looking at me like you were afraid to ask for anything, and I thought maybe I was doing the same thing in reverse. Maybe I was keeping you close because it was easy, not because I was brave. She turned to me then. Brooklyn looked simple. Work, movement, no feelings, sitting across the hall asking questions. I said quietly that she could still take it. She nodded. "I know. That's the problem. Leaving is easy when staying asks you to be honest." The few inches between us felt ridiculous by then, but neither of us rushed to erase them. I think we both understood that attraction had never been the hardest part. The hard part was believing it meant what we wanted it to mean. I told her that when she said, "Try me instead," the first thing I felt was not comfort. It was fear, because it sounded too much like something I had wanted before I had permission to want it. Eva's eyes softened. She said, "You had permission." I almost laughed because the words were simple enough to ruin me. Then she reached over and set her hand on the step between us, palm up, not grabbing, not demanding, just offering. I placed my hand in hers, and she closed her fingers around mine carefully, like we were making a decision small enough to survive the night. For a long moment, that was all we did. When I finally leaned closer, I stopped before the moment could become assumption. Eva looked at me, understood the question without me turning it into a performance, and nodded once. What happened after that was not dramatic. It was not a solution. It did not cancel Brooklyn or fix all the scared places in me. It was just a brief, quiet kiss on a cold stoop, soft enough to feel like a promise and careful enough to admit we were both still afraid. When we pulled apart, She rested her forehead near mine for 1 second, then sat back with a breath that trembled. I wanted to say something perfect. Naturally, I said, "So the stoop is definitely going to be weird now." Eva laughed, and the sound had relief in it. Then she looked down at our joined hands and said, "Simon, I still haven't decided whether I'm taking Brooklyn." The strange thing about kissing Eva on the stoop was that the next morning, the building looked exactly the same, which felt almost rude. The mailboxes were still crooked, Mrs. Donnelly's newspaper still leaned against the lobby wall, and the radiator pipes still clanked like they were trying to communicate with ships at sea. But every ordinary sound had a new meaning because Eva lived 22 steps from my door, and now I knew what her mouth felt like when she was trying to be brave. I saw her at 8:15 a.m. carrying a canvas bag full of fabric samples, hair still damp, sunglasses pushed on top of her head even though the hallway had no sun. We both froze. Then she lifted one hand and said, with complete dignity, that she was late because one of her pillows had betrayed her, and I said I hoped it had legal representation. She smiled, and for a second the whole hallway softened. We did not kiss. We did not talk about Brooklyn. We simply stood there with too much unsaid between us until her rideshare honked outside and she rushed down the stairs wearing my nervous system like perfume. For the next 2 weeks, we tried to be intentional in a way that made us both adorable and insufferable. Eva insisted that if we were going to date, we had to actually date, not just wander into each other's apartments and let proximity do paperwork. So I asked her out properly by knocking on her door with one hand behind my back and immediately forgetting the casual sentence I had prepared. She opened the door in an old black sweater, looked at my expression, and said, "You are either asking me to dinner or confessing to a minor crime." I told her dinner, probably, unless she rejected me, in which case I might pivot to crime for emotional variety. She said yes before I could finish embarrassing myself. We went for coffee at the corner place with the uneven tables, then to a used bookstore where she judged covers with professional severity, and I pretended not to love how seriously she took fonts. Later, I walked her back to our building, even though she lived across the hall from me, and when she pointed that out, I said I was committed to the full boyfriend applicant experience. Her face went pink at the word boyfriend, and she hid it by pretending to inspect a crack in the sidewalk. There were good moments, the kind that made fear look melodramatic. Eva slipped into the back row of the Orpheum after one of my late screenings and sat with her knees tucked under her coat, watching me close the register like I was doing something more impressive than counting 20s. When I asked why she was there, she said she wanted to see the place after everyone else had left, then added that she liked me better when I was not performing calm for customers. I told her calm was part of the uniform. She said she knew, then reached out and straightened my collar with 2 fingers, slow enough to make me forget the alarm code I had typed every night for 6 years. Another night, we walked along the lakefront after dinner, and she put her hand in my coat pocket because hers were cold, and because, as she put it, romance is mostly climate management with better lighting. I laughed and held her hand inside the pocket until our knuckles warmed together. It should have been simple. Sometimes it almost was. But Brooklyn sat under everything like a suitcase neither of us had packed. I saw the messages flash on her phone more than once, not because I was looking, though that is what guilty men always say, but because a bright screen in a dim hallway is not exactly subtle. Contract revisions, travel dates, housing options. A producer named Maeve asking whether Eva could commit to the full 6 weeks and be available for follow-up work in July. Every time Eva turned the phone over, something in me tightened. She was not hiding it exactly, but she was not inviting me into it either, and I did not know whether I had earned the right to ask. That was the problem with new love, or whatever we were allowing ourselves to call this. It created feelings before it created permissions. I could kiss her at my apartment door and still not know whether I was allowed to say that the idea of her leaving made the whole hallway feel temporary. Eva sensed the change because she sensed everything, especially the things I tried to bury under jokes. One night, after we had gone to a small jazz bar she claimed was romantically tolerable, we came home laughing about a drummer who looked personally offended by rhythm. The laughter lasted until we reached the stoop. She stopped there instead of going inside, and I knew from the way she folded her arms that the evening had reached its honest portion. "You've been doing that thing again," she said. I asked which thing because, unfortunately, I had several. She told me I was smiling with my mouth while moving away with everything else. I leaned against the railing and tried to say I was fine, but even I was bored of that lie. Eva sat on the step and looked up at me, not angry, just tired of waiting for me to hand her a door she could open. "Is it Brooklyn?" she asked. The relief of not having to introduce the word myself was almost enough to make me forgive her for being right. I sat beside her, leaving no space this time, because pretending distance made difficult conversations safer had not worked for anyone in human history. I told her I did not want to be the man who made her career decision about me, and she said she had not asked me to be. I told her I also did not want to be kept outside the decision while being close enough to kiss goodnight, and that made her go quiet. For a moment, I thought I had pushed too hard. Then she nodded and said that was fair. She admitted the paperwork was getting serious and that she had been delaying a final answer because every version of yes or no seemed to accuse her of something. If she said yes to Brooklyn, maybe she was running. If she said no, maybe she was letting a man she had barely begun dating rearrange her life. I told her I did not want that either. She turned to me then, eyes sharp in the streetlight, and said, "Then what do you want, Simon?" It was a clean question, which made it cruel. Clean questions leave no room for decorative cowardice. I could have said I wanted her to stay, but that was not the whole truth, and not the best truth. I wanted her to want to stay. I wanted to be more than the man who happened to be standing there after another woman failed to see me. I wanted to believe that if Marissa had laughed at my jokes and touched my hand and asked for a second date, Eva still would have found her way to that sentence on the stoop. But wanting that felt selfish, so I said the smaller version, that I did not know how to trust the timing. Eva looked down at her hands, and the hurt in her face was quiet but unmistakable. "Sometimes I wonder the same thing," she said. "Not because I don't mean what I said, because I don't know if you heard me or if you only heard someone finally saying the opposite of what she said." I tried to answer, but nothing clean came. She waited a few seconds, then asked the question I had been avoiding since the first night. "If that bad date had gone fine, would you even be here with me now?" The words did not sound accusing. That was worse. They sounded like she was giving me one chance to tell the truth before both of us built something on a story neither of us fully trusted. I looked at her, at the woman who had waited on the stoop, stolen fries from my plate, kissed me like fear was not the final authority, and I wanted to say yes immediately. I wanted to give her the answer she deserved in a voice strong enough to erase every doubt. But the truth was that I had spent so long being chosen halfway, appreciated sideways, wanted only when convenient, that I did not know how to answer without first asking myself what kind of man I wanted to be when nobody had just hurt me. Eva saw the delay. Her expression softened, but her hand slipped from mine. And for the first time since she had said, "Try me instead," the space between us felt real again. I did not sleep much that night either, but this time it was not because of hope. Hope at least has a little warmth to it. This was the colder thing that comes after you realize someone has asked the right question and you have not respected them enough to answer quickly. Eva went upstairs before me, not dramatically, not with a door slam or a speech. She just stood from the stoop, said she needed to think, and gave me my jacket back with both hands like it had become too intimate to keep wearing. I watched her climb the stairs and disappear into her apartment, then stayed outside until the city got quiet enough that I could hear myself clearly. The answer was not no. That should have comforted me. It did not, because the answer was yes, and somehow yes felt heavier than no, because yes meant I could not keep hiding behind the bad timing. It meant I had wanted Eva before Marissa, before the wine bar, before the sentence on the stoop. It meant I had been waiting too, only less bravely. The next day was ordinary in the most insulting possible way. I had to open the theater, answer emails about a broken ticket scanner, argue with a soda vendor, and explain to a man in a linen hat that no, the Orpheum did not validate parking for a garage 5 blocks away just because he felt emotionally validated by foreign films. All day, Eva's question kept coming back in pieces. If the bad date had gone fine, would I be here with her now? At first, I tried to answer it like a defendant building a case. Maybe not that night, maybe not immediately. Maybe I would have gone out with Marissa again because that was what people did when something was not terrible. But the more honest answer lived underneath the practical one. Even if the date had gone fine, I would still have looked for Eva's light under her door when I got home. I would still have listened for her steps in the hallway. I would still have saved her the ridiculous velvet chair from the theater storage room because she had once said it looked like a chair owned by a retired magician with secrets. I would still have been walking around my own life angled toward her, pretending it was only neighborly gravity. By 3 in the afternoon, I stopped pretending the answer was something I could text. Eva deserved more than a message squeezed between work and fear. I left my assistant in charge for an hour, which made him suspicious because I had apparently never done anything impulsive in his presence except once buy a questionable vending machine sandwich. I crossed the neighborhood under full daylight, no rain, no midnight, no wounded walk home from another woman. That mattered. I wanted the moment to have no excuse built into it. When I reached our building, I almost went to her door, but the hallway felt too much like the old in-between space. So I called her instead and asked if she could meet me at the Orpheum before the evening show. She was quiet for a second and I could hear traffic behind her. Then she said, "Is this a good conversation or the kind where I should wear emotionally stable shoes?" I smiled despite everything and told her stable shoes were always wise in Chicago, but it was a good conversation if I did not ruin it by talking too much. She said, "That is a very specific risk," and agreed to come. I waited for her in the empty theater, with the house lights low but not dark. That was important too. I did not want shadows to make me braver than I was. Eva arrived 15 minutes later, wearing dark jeans, a gray coat, and the expression of a woman who had decided not to protect me from the consequences of my own silence. She stood at the end of the aisle and looked around. "You brought me to your natural habitat," she said. "Should I be nervous?" I told her probably, because I had rehearsed this speech 4 times, and every version made me sound like a man apologizing to a jury. She walked closer, slower than usual, and sat in the aisle seat instead of beside me, which felt fair. I stood because sitting made me feel like I might fold in half. For once, I did not start with a joke. I told her she had asked if I would be there with her if the bad date had gone well, and that I hated how badly I had answered by not answering. Her face softened, but she stayed quiet, giving me the hard mercy of space. I told her the truth as plainly as I could. I said maybe I would not have been brave that exact night if Marissa had wanted a second drink. Maybe I would have come home and done the same cowardly thing I had been doing for months, smiling at Eva in the hallway, calling it harmless, letting another day pass, because wanting her felt like a way to ruin the one place that still felt easy. But I said that was not the same as not wanting her. The bad date didn't create this, I told her. It embarrassed me enough to stop lying about it. Eva looked down then, and I watched her fingers curl around the armrest. My voice shook a little when I kept going, but I did not hide it. I told her I did not want her because she found me on a bad night. I wanted her because she was the person I still would have walked toward on a good one. I wanted her in daylight, after sleep, after work, after no one had hurt me. I wanted her when nothing dramatic was happening at all. That was the line that finally moved her. Eva pressed her lips together and looked up at the screen like she was trying to keep her face organized. I sat down then, 1 seat away, close enough to stay, far enough not to corner her. She said she had been afraid the same way, only from the other side. Brooklyn had looked clean because it did not ask her to risk becoming someone's almost again. Work was simple. Contracts had dates. Rooms could be staged, photographed, and left behind. Feelings across the hall were messier. They asked her to stay in a place long enough to find out whether comfort could turn into clarity instead of another soft trap. She told me she had not delayed the Brooklyn answer because of me, exactly. She delayed it because saying yes would mean leaving before she had to admit she wanted to stay, and saying no would mean admitting staying had a name. I told her I would not ask her to turn down the job for me. I meant it, even though it hurt to say. If she wanted Brooklyn, I would learn how to want her without making a cage out of it. Eva laughed softly at that, not because it was funny, but because I had apparently stepped on the exact nerve. "That's the thing," she said. "I don't want you to be noble so loudly that I can't tell whether you're fighting for me or politely holding the door open." I looked at her then. She was right. Of course she was. So I reached across the empty seat between us, palm up, the way she had done on the stoop. "Then I'm fighting," I said. "Not against Brooklyn, not against your work. For this. For us having the chance to find out what we are when nobody is running and nobody is waiting to be picked by accident." Eva stared at my hand like it was the contract that mattered. Then she placed hers in it. She did not kiss me immediately. I liked that. It made the moment feel chosen instead of swept away. She held my hand and told me she had decided that morning before I called. She had turned down the open-ended version of Brooklyn, the one that could have kept stretching if she let it, but she was still taking a shorter 2-week project there later in the summer because she needed to know she had not shrunk her life out of fear. I felt the answer move through me slowly. Not easy, not perfect, but honest. She was not disappearing, and she was not staying as proof of love either. She was choosing a life large enough to include her ambition and me, if I was brave enough to fit inside it. I lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, and her eyes glistened in the low theater light. "So," she said, voice unsteady but teasing because she was still Eva, "try me instead," was apparently a long-term proposal with travel clauses. I laughed, finally, and leaned closer. This time, when she met me halfway, the kiss felt nothing like rescue. It felt like an answer neither of us had borrowed from a bad night. After that, we did not suddenly become perfect people just because we had finally said the brave things out loud. That is the part romance movies usually skip, probably because nobody wants to watch two adults learn how to be honest without making it a federal incident. Eva still panicked sometimes when work got busy, and her instinct was to pack her feelings into neat little boxes labeled later. I still had moments where I mistook quiet for distance and distance for proof that I was about to be politely returned again. But something had changed after the Orpheum. We had stopped treating fear like a judge. It was still in the room sometimes, still clearing its throat, still trying to remind us of every old failure, but it no longer got to write the ending by itself. When Eva took the 2-week Brooklyn project later that summer, I drove her to the airport with coffee in the cup holder and a ridiculous amount of calm I had not actually earned. At the curb, she looked at me like she could tell I was rehearsing noble silence, and she said, "Simon, I'm coming back. You're allowed to miss me without acting like a Civil War widow." I told her I would try to grieve in a modern way. She kissed me then, right there by the departure's doors, quick and certain, and said, "Good. Text me when you get home." 2 weeks was not nothing, but it was not the end of the world either. We learned that missing someone could be proof of life instead of proof of loss. She sent me pictures of hotel lobbies with captions like, "This chair is ugly" in 6 languages, and I sent her photos of the Orpheum marquee because one of the bulbs kept flickering and she had become strangely invested in its emotional journey. At night, we talked until one of us got too tired to finish a sentence. Sometimes the calls were easy and funny, sometimes they were quiet, and the quiet no longer scared me the way it used to. On her last night in Brooklyn, she admitted she had been afraid she would get there and feel relief, not because she did not want me, but because leaving had always been the cleaner answer in her life. Instead, she said the city was beautiful, the work was good, and still, every time something made her laugh, she wanted to turn toward me. I lay in bed in Chicago, staring at the ceiling, and told her I knew the feeling. The old me would have softened that confession into a joke. The new me let it stand. When Eva came home, I did not wait upstairs pretending I had accidentally been near the door. I waited on the stoop. It felt right, maybe too obvious, but some places earn the ceremony. I had picked up coffee from the corner place, hers too sweet and mine too bitter, because apparently our relationship still needed balance. She got out of the rideshare wearing a wrinkled black dress, a denim jacket, and the tired, bright expression of someone who had been living out of a suitcase and was finally done pretending she enjoyed it. For 1 second, she just stood there at the curb and looked at me. Then she smiled in a way that made the whole block feel warmer. "Waiting for someone?" she asked. I held up her coffee. "Only if she has terrible taste in chairs and strong opinions about throw pillows." Eva walked up the steps, took the cup from my hand, and kissed me before tasting it. That seemed like a positive review. We stayed on the stoop for a while instead of going inside. The city moved around us the way it always had, buses sighing, neighbors carrying groceries, someone's dog making legal threats at a pigeon. Eva leaned against my shoulder, and I rested my hand over hers without asking myself whether it meant too much. It did mean too much. That was the point. She told me about Brooklyn, the good parts and the lonely parts, the work she was proud of, the offer she had declined to stay longer, not because of me alone, but because she was tired of confusing motion with freedom. I told her about the theater, about Mrs. Donnelly asking whether my stylish young lady was back yet, about how I had watched a man propose after a Saturday matinee and felt jealous not of the ring, but of how sure he looked. Eva lifted her head at that, eyebrow raised. I told her not to panic. I was not proposing on municipal concrete after 2 weeks of airport separation. She said, "Good," because I would need better lighting. Then she squeezed my hand and added, "Softer, but I like that you thought about certainty." That night, we did not make any grand declarations. We ordered Thai food, ate it on my living room floor because my table was covered in theater invoices, and argued over whether a movie could be called romantic if everyone in it needed therapy and a better coat. Later, when I walked her across the hall to her door, we both laughed at the absurdity of saying goodnight 12 feet apart. She touched my chest with 2 fingers and said she liked this part: the asking, the choosing, the not assuming just because we were close. I told her I liked it too, even though I was already planning to ask her to breakfast. She smiled like she knew. Of course she knew. Eva always knew more than was convenient. Before she went inside, she looked at me for a long moment and said, "I'm glad your bad date went badly." I laughed because it should have sounded cruel, but it did not. It sounded grateful. I told her I was glad I came home. Months later, the stoop became ours in a way no lease or label could have made official. We still sat there after long days, but the silence had changed. Ava was no longer pretending, she was just getting air. I was no longer coming home from women who liked me in theory and left me in practice. Sometimes she would wait for me after a late screening, wrapped in my coat with 2 coffees beside her, and when I came up the sidewalk, she would tilt her head and say, "Rough night?" I would say, "Try me instead." And she would roll her eyes because I had stolen her line and made it worse. Then she would make room for me on the step. That was love, I think, or at least the version that saved me. Not being rescued from rejection forever. Not being promised life would never bruise me again. But having one person who saw the ordinary man walking up the block and still chose to move closer. So when people ask how Eva and I started, I usually say my date ended early and my neighbor happened to be waiting outside. It is the cleaner version. The truth is that Eva had been waiting longer than that, and so had I. We were just 2 careful people sitting across from each other in the same life, mistaking fear for timing until one bad night finally made the quiet impossible. I used to think being wanted had to arrive like a spark, sudden and undeniable, or it did not count. Eva taught me that sometimes it arrives like a light left on across the hall, like a coffee gone cold on a stoop, like someone saying the risky thing because they are tired of watching you call yourself easy to leave. And the best part was not that she found me on a bad night. The best part was that when good nights came, I still walked toward her. Have you ever had someone see you clearly when you were trying hard to act fine? Or have you ever realized the person who felt ordinary in your life was actually the one choosing you most honestly? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and come back for the next story.